Hi. Welcome to this week's session of #Land of Tomorrow, the Light of Sovereignty, where here we explore man's insured contract with time in Chapter 4. Come along with us.
Fourth consideration. Man's insured contract with time. Younger men usually have more energy than those more senior and less direction, where with seniors resting on laurels of yesterday, those younger await the day to prove their valor. Not that natives concerned themselves more with European affairs, but centuries of native kingdoms' interaction with one another didn't produce the enmity which was more politically so with the introduction of European firearms. Who knows how the balance of power changed, but the Iroquois and the Shawnee may have been just the first with which Europeans built alliances. Documenting distribution, English had to keep up with the French for obvious reasons, as natives of English persuasion were directed toward the empire's greatest threat to power. Just as brothers shouldn't attack brothers, countrymen those of the same, or Memphians their neighbors, neither would natives of English persuasion those with whom they were more social. As trading firearms to natives became an increasing necessity, man's insured contract with time made natives an even greater threat, but a balance had to be maintained. Distribution had to continue, as native attacks on English usually meant aggression from natives of French persuasion. Sure, many still fought with swords in the American Revolution, but natives witnessing the damage of firearms surely wouldn't prefer encounters with spears and arrows without a strategy. Battle lines were drawn but overlapping territory, and with the benefit of English firearms, time would ensure armies rise in the wilderness where hopefully those English would prevail. None of us may be here tomorrow, but man's insured contract with time guarantees growth, while the introduction of firearms regulated crowd control.
Everyone has a designated time before expiration, and in that time statistics show that 9 times out of 10 we benefit increasingly from year to year, but as English recorded its empirical achievements, none recorded native loss. See, after the Revolution, settlers' contracts with natives remained in the greater interest of trade, where if halted so would protection from those more French. A good research topic would be to inquire how many weapons were distributed to our native allies, and even more so how much ammunition. It wasn't about the price but the principality that a tool used by others were not just hammers and firearms, but English hammers and firearms. Just before those younger mature, they long for greater power where, if energy is not directed positively, it could prove detrimental, and with firearms tragically so. Some call natives savage because their differences with one another were as dividing as on the European stage, if not more so. We say we should research distributed ammo, so some picture of how many natives lost their lives on the battlefields fighting other native kingdoms. Of the ammunition, perhaps 30% was used for practice and 70% in battle, where 40% was inaccurate, 20% found a target and 10% was lost to never be recovered. Of the 20% that found a target, not all could be fatal, and no more than 50%, but much more ammo was traded than thought, as native warriors littered the #Land of Tomorrow.
We all have a designated time when we'll expire, but whether soon or later none will ever know. It is difficult to get some controlled by their eyes to think of concepts grasped in the mind. As a result, the light of sovereignty is seen in other things as opposed to in oneself, where consequently, individual achievement is minimized in lieu of the greater purpose of the whole. This greater cause for or against a position is that which may never be in one's lifetime, but willing posterity to live in a more beneficial environment, many more give it their all. Though there are life expectancies for populations, no one can tell another in the midst of battle that tomorrow may not be, nor those reclined under a tree by the river that yesterday never was. Whether young or old, we see more time ahead than behind, or the other way around, but in battle death is determined by the victor, and in living none see how close they are to expiration. To think natives hadn't pondered stories of yesterday told by those older, of those who had come even before they were born, or considered future hopes of vainglory that died in battle or of ages far from realistic. Remembered in song, native heroes and heroines remain in oral history, hidden from English ears, and perhaps, but hopefully not, lost forevermore. Burial mounds are stacked with such silent stories.
Growth accelerates in the #Land of Tomorrow, where taking precautions, English natives were armed to counter those French. Just as we speak more fluently in English from 5 to 10 years old, economics is championed all the more, when natives bartered for textiles, tools, guns, and sweet molasses. Not that natives were dependent on English trade, but either the English could fight those natives of French persuasion or train others more loyal to the English Empire than. The distribution of English weapons created a buffer zone where those accepting were also in league with imperial motivation. We generally don't bite hands that feed us, where guns are one thing but ammunition quite another. Relationships grew as the wilderness was more fortified, the English need to distribute more, and in increasing amounts grew. As a fruit tree bears abundantly in orchards, that much more soldiers were bred and trained, as most men are, to fight. Just as we grow in intellect, we grow in courage, where in time dreams once thought far off were then right at hand, if only it weren't the French persuasion.
Living in the present tomorrow isn't promised to any, but man's contract with time guarantees growth, while European firearms regulated crowd control. English couldn't afford for France to arm all natives, so if whether they had first or not isn't the issue, but more efficiently is. Perfection is measured in quality and not necessarily sequence or quantity. Mastery of military order, rank and file must have reflected in native structure, as those with firearms were organized as well, with a different language known by but few. As man's insured contract with time puts native forces incalculably many, we never really knew how many natives there were, so again English were at natives' mercy. Moving forward with the rest of the world, standing still is actually falling behind.
That concludes all the information included in this lecture. We will see you again next Thursday morning for coffee and Danish at 9:11 a.m. Thank you for your time and consideration.